Alright, sorry about the delay. Give me one sec here, I'm gonna nix the stream and start it back up. There we go. Much better. Sorry about that. Welcome back to whatever we're calling this. We're still calling this Fraggoth Reads? Okay. I gotta get with my editor. Sorry about the little interruption in service there. I also don't mind the vacuuming noise somebody above me is making, is doing house cleaning. Happy Martin Luther King Day, which it is, no matter what anyone in certain positions of power would like you to believe. We'll stick to that one. Other than being here, I'm not going to be doing anything special for this particular Martin Luther King Day, but in future, who knows. I do still hope to do something special for Black History Month. Where'd I put my copy of Ring Shout? Where'd that go? There it is. I see it now. I see it now. I can't remember the author's name offhand. It's just out of my field of view. I can see the cover, but I can't see the rest of it. Anyway, welcome back to Endymion by Dan Simmons. Right above me. And let's see. What happened last time? Oh, right. Federico de Soya is has been interrogated by the Inquisition. There is what is the name of the full name of the organization? Ah, yes. The Holy Roman Office of the Universal Inquisition. So he's had a bit of a sit-down with a number of inquisitors, which he definitely did not expect. Well, I think he did, kind of. Certainly he didn't expect to wake up on Pachem after setting course for... what are they bonking up there? I need to get one of those dampener, foam dampeners on this thing. What I need is a slightly better soundproofed environment, but right now we don't have that. I have ways and means I could get that done, but they'd all be kind of a pain. But I could make it work. So what he didn't expect was to wake up on Pachem after having set course for Hebron. And he's like, okay. He wakes up there. He's a bit confused. He's like, okay, so why am I here, though? Because if Hebron didn't work out, we were going to move on to the next system in line. And the officials there are like, well, something went wrong, then something went very wrong, and then you came back at Mare Infinitus. And incidentally, Rettig is dead, apparently. He has died the true death in transit due to a flaw in the resurrection crash. So we hardly knew ye. And it's too bad because, as far as we know, he didn't really do anything wrong other than be a Pax trooper, which isn't necessarily something you do by choice, per se. It's like, if somebody's offering immortality, whether you believe in the religion or not, I think you're going to become a convert, which is kind of the recurring point in this, is it's like, there's a reason the Pax is doing as well as it is. What they haven't said is what the catch is. Well, other than being forced to follow papal rule. Where were we? So he doesn't expect that, but he does get inquisitorated about his actions, namely for what he did down on Mare Infinitus in terms of flexing the muscle of the papal disci he's been given, and possibly this is all just politics, but also possibly he did massively overstep the boundaries of the power he was supposed to have. Meanwhile, our friends Raul and Ania and Betic have gotten through. They're on Sol Draconi Septum, I think. Yes, Sol Draconi Septum, which is this ice planet. that the River Tethys, part of the River Tethys runs through. And so they got away from the river portion, which seemed like they were caved in and couldn't escape. But now they are traveling through some caves, but they're not alone. And on that note, we will rejoin them as soon as I figure out where I'm going to partition off for today. I can't go quite as long today, unfortunately, as I would like. I have a pretty wicked chest cold. So if I seem low energy or gulping for air, that is probably it. I have done a COVID test. It is not COVID. It is something that I think has been lurking with me for a little while now and is just kind of flaring up into angry significance. So there may be some awkward pauses and hiccups while I cough or splutter. And for that, I apologize. How long is that chapter there? I might be able to get through that one too. Oh, I think today, though, we get introduced to a new character. This is going to be fun. So, yeah. We are still on for Wednesday, Thursday, however. That is the plan. We'll see what happens. Alrighty. Without further ado, let's get crack-a-lackin'. '40. We spent 3 weeks with the Chicxulub on the frozen world of Sol Draconi Septim, and in that time we rested, recovered, wandered the frozen tunnels of their frozen atmosphere with them, learned a few words and phrases of their difficult language, visited Father Glaucus in the embedded city, stalked and were stalked by Arctic wraiths, and made that final, terrible trek downriver. But I am getting ahead of myself. It is easy to do, to rush the tale, especially with the probability increasing of inhaling cyanide on the next breath I take. But enough. This story will end abruptly when I do. Oh, but enough. This story will end abruptly when I do, not before, and it matters little if it is here or there or in between. I will tell it as if I shall be allowed to tell it all. Our first glimpse of the Chicxulub almost ended in tragedy for both sides. We had doused our hand lamps and were crouching in the weighted darkness of that ice corridor, my plasma rifle charged and ready, when the dimmest of lights appeared on the next bend in the tunnel, and large, inhuman shapes ambled around the corner. I flicked on my hand lamp, and its cold, dulled beam illuminated a terrifying sight. 3 or 4 broad beasts, white fur, black claws the length of my hand, white teeth that were even longer, reddish, glowing eyes. The creatures moved in a fog of their own breath. I raised the plasma rifle to my shoulder and clicked the select to rapid fire. "Don't shoot!" cried Ania, grabbing my arm. "They're human!" Her cry stayed not only my hand, but that of the Chicxulub. Long bone spears had appeared from the folds of white fur, and our lamp beams illuminated sharpened points and pale arms pulled back to hurl them. But Ania's voice seemed to freeze the tableau, with both sides a muscle's twitch away from violence. I then saw the pale faces beneath the visors of wraith teeth, broad faces, blunt-nosed, wrinkled, pale to the point of albinoism, but all too human, as were the dark eyes that gleamed back at us. I lowered the light so that it was not in their eyes.
The Chitchatuk were broad and muscular, well adapted to Sol Dracone septums punishing 1.7 Gs, and they looked even wider and more powerful, with the layers of wraith furs wrapped around them so. We were soon to learn that they each wore the forward half of the animal's hide, including its head, so the black wraith claws hung below their hands, the wraith teeth covering their faces like a dagger-sharp portcullis. We also learned that the wraith's black eye lenses, even without the complicated optics and nerves that allowed the monsters to see in almost total darkness, still worked like simple night vision goggles. Everything the Chitchatuk wore and were carrying had come from the wraiths. Bone spears, rawhide thongs made from wraith gut and tendon, their water bags formed from tied-off wraith intestines, their sleeping robes and pallets, even the two artifacts they carried with them, the mitre-shaped brazier fashioned from wraith bone carried on rawhide thongs, which held the glowing embers that lighted their way, and the more complicated bone bowl and funnel, which melted the ice to water over the brazier. We did not know until later that their already ample bodies looked broader and lumpier because of the water bags they carried under their robe, using their body heat to keep the water liquid. The standoff must have held for a full minute and a half before Aeneas stepped forward on our side and the Chitchatuk we later knew as Kuchiat stepped forward toward us. Kuchiat spoke first, a torrent of harsh noises sounding like nothing so much as great icicles crashing to a hard surface. "I'm sorry," said Aeneas. "I don't understand." She looked back at us. I looked at A. Betic. "Do you recognize this dialect?" Web English had been the standard for so many centuries that it was almost shocking to hear words that bore no meaning. Even 3 centuries after the fall, according to the off-worlders who had come through Hyperion, most planetary and regional dialects were still understandable. "No, I do not," said A. Betic. "Endymion, if I might suggest, the comlog?" I nodded and retrieved the bracelet from my pack. The Chitchatuk watched warily, still speaking among themselves, eyes alert for a weapon. Their spear arms relaxed as I raised the bangle to eye level and pressed it on. "I am activated and awaiting your question or command," chirped the ice-frosted bracelet. "Listen," I said as Kuchiat began speaking again. "Tell me if you can translate this." The wraith-garbed warrior made a short, crashing speech. "Well," I said to the comlog, "this language or dialect is not familiar," chimed the ship's voice from the comlog. "I am familiar with several Old Earth languages, including pre-web English, German, French, Dutch, Japanese." "Never mind," I said. The Chitchatuk were staring at the babbling comlog, but there was no fear or superstition visible in those large dark eyes that peered from between wraith teeth, only curiosity. "I would suggest," continued the comlog, "that you keep me activated for some weeks or months while this language is being spoken. I could then collect a database from which a simple lexicon could be constructed. It might also be preferable to—" "Thanks anyway," I said and pressed it off. Aeneas took a step closer to Kuchiat and pantomimed our being cold and tired. She made gestures for food, pulling a blanket over us, and sleep. Kuchiat grunted and conferred with the others. There were 7 of the Chitchatuk crowding the ice tunnel now, and we were to learn that their hunting parties always traveled in prime numbers, as did their larger bands. Finally, after speaking separately to each of his men, Kuchiat spoke to us briefly, turned back up the ascending corridor, and gestured for us to follow. Shivering, bent under the weight of the world's gravity, straining to see by their dim ember light after we had switched off our hand lamps to conserve the batteries, making sure that my inertial compass was working, leaving its digital trail of crumbs behind as we walked, we followed Kuchiat and his men toward the Chitchatuk camp. They were a generous people. They gave us each a wraith robe to wear, more hind robes to sleep in and on, wraith broth heated over their little brazier, water from their body-heated bags, and their trust. The Chitchatuk, we soon learned, did not war among themselves. The thought of killing another human was alien to them. Essentially, the Chitchatuk, indigenes who had been adapting to the ice for almost 1,000 years, were the only survivors of the fall, the viral plagues, and the wraiths. The Chitchatuk took everything they needed from the monstrous wraiths, and, from what we could glean, the wraiths depended solely upon the Chitchatuk for their own food. All other life forms, always marginal, had fallen below the survival threshold after the fall and the failure of terraforming. Our first couple of days with them were spent sleeping, eating, and trying to communicate. The Chitchatuk had no permanent villages in the ice. They would sleep for a few hours, fold their robes, and move on through the warren of tunnels. When heating ice to water, their only use of fire since the embers were not enough to warm them and they ate their meat raw, they suspended the mitre brazier from the iced ceiling with 3 wraith tendon thongs so that it would leave a telltale melted point in the ice. There were 23 of them in the tribe, band, clan, whatever you could call them, and at first it was not possible to tell if there were any females among them. The Chitchatuk seemed to wear their robes at all times, just lifting them enough to avoid soiling them while urinating or defecating in one of the ice fissures. It was not until we saw the woman named Chachia mating with Kuchiat in our 3rd sleep period that we were sure that females were in the band. Slowly, as we walked and talked with them through the never-changing dimness of tunnels over the next 2 days, we began to learn their faces and names. Kuchiat, the leader, was, despite the avalanche of his voice, a gentle man, given to smiling with both his thin lips and his black eyes. Chiaku, his second in command, was the tallest of the band and wore a wraith robe with a streak of blood on it, which we later realized was a mark of honor. Aichakut was the angry one, often scowling at us and always keeping his distance. I think that if Aichakut had been the leader of the hunting band when we'd encountered them, there would have been dead bodies in the ice that day. Kuchtu was, we thought, a sort of medicine man, and it was his job to circle the ice niche or tunnel where we slept, muttering incantations and removing his wraith leather gloves to press his bare palms against the ice. It was my guess that he was driving away bad spirits. Ania suggested wryly that he might just be doing what we were, trying to find a way out of this ice maze. Chichtiku was the fire carrier and obviously proud of having attained that honor. The embers were a mystery to us. They continued to glow and give off heat and light for days, weeks, yet were never stoked or renewed. It was not until we met Father Glaucus that this puzzle was cleared up. There were no children with the band, and it was hard to tell the ages of the Chitchatuk we got to know. Kuchiat was obviously older than most. His face was a web of wrinkles radiating from the bridge of that wide blade of a nose, but we never succeeded in discussing ages with any of them. They recognized Ania as a child, or at least a young adult, and treated her accordingly. The women, we noticed after identifying 3 of them as such, carried out the role of hunter and sentry in equal rotation with the men. Although they were to honor A. Betic and me with the job of standing guard while the band slept, 3 people with weapons were always left awake, they never asked Ania to perform that chore. But they obviously enjoyed her and enjoyed talking with her, everyone using the combination of simple words and elaborate signs that have served to bridge the gap between peoples since the Paleolithic. On the 3rd day, Ania succeeded in asking them to return to the river with us. At first they were puzzled, but her signs and the few words she had picked up soon communicated the concept. The river, the raft floating, the arch of the Farcaster frozen in ice, they exclaimed at this. Then the ice wall and our walking up the ice tunnel before meeting our friends, the Chitchatuk. When Ania suggested that we return to the river together, the band gathered up the sleeping robes, stuffed them into the wraith-hide packs, and were marching with us within moments. For once, I led the way, the glowing dial of the inertial compass unraveling the many twists, turns, ascents, and descents we had taken in our 3 days of wandering. I should say here that if it had not been for our chronometers, time would have disappeared in the ice tunnels of Sol Draconi Septum. The unchanging dim glow from the bone brazier, the glint of the ice walls, the darkness ahead of us and behind, the in-pressing cold, the short sleep periods and endless hours of laboring up icy corridors with the weight of the planet on our backs, everything combined to destroy our sense of time. But according to the chronometer, it was late on the third day since abandoning the raft that we descended the last bit of narrow corridor and returned to the river. It was a sad sight, the splintered foremast and battered logs, the stern of the craft almost submerged from a build-up of ice, the lanterns we had left behind coated white with frost, and the entire vessel looking empty and forlorn with our tent and gear. The Chitchatuk were fascinated, showing the most animation we had seen from them since our initial encounter. Using lines of braided wraithhide, Kuchiat and several of the others lowered themselves to the raft and examined every detail carefully. The stone of our abandoned hearth, the metal of the lanterns, the nylon line used to lash the logs. Their excitement was tangible, and I realized that in a society where the only source of building material, weaponry, and clothing came from a single animal, a skillful predator at that, the raft must represent a treasure trove of raw material. They could have attempted to kill or abandon us then and taken that wealth, but the Chitchatuk were a generous people, and not even greed could alter their view that all humans were allies, just as all wraiths were enemies and prey. We had not seen a wraith at that time, except, of course, for the skins we wore over our tropical clothing, since the robes were so incredibly warm, rivaling the thermal blanket for insulative efficiency, that we were able to pack away most of the outer layers we had bundled on. But if we were innocent of the wraith's power and hunger then, we would not stay so innocent for long. Once again, Aeneas communicated the idea of our floating downriver through the arch. She pantomimed the ice wall, pointed to it, and then showed them our continued trip downriver to the second arch. This got Kuchiat and his band even more animated, and they tried to talk to us without sign language, their harsh words and sentences falling on us like a load of gravel dumped at our ears. When that failed, they turned and talked excitedly to one another. Finally, Kuchiat stepped forward and spoke a short sentence to the three of us. We heard the word glaucus repeated. We had heard it before in their speeches, the word standing out as alien to their language. And when Kuchiat gestured upward and repeated the sign for all of us walking up toward the surface, we eagerly agreed. And thus it was, each of us swathed in robes of wraith fur, our backs hunched against the weight of our packs in the exhausting gravity, our feet scrabbling on rock-hard ice, that we set out toward the ice-buried city to meet the priest. 41. When the summons finally comes to release Father Captain de Soya from virtual house arrest in the Legionaries of Christ Rectory, it arrives not from the Holy Office of the Inquisition, as has been expected, but in the person of Monsignor Lucas Oddi, Undersecretary to the Vatican Secretariat of State, His Excellency Simone Augustino Cardinal Lordusimi. The walk into Vatican City and through the Vatican Gardens is all but overwhelming to de Soya. Everything he sees and hears, the pale blue skies of Pacem, the flittering of finches in the pear orchards, the soft stroke of Vespers bells, makes emotions surge within him to the point that he has to work to hold back tears. Monsignor Oddi chats while they walk, mixing Vatican gossip with mild pleasantries, in a way that makes de Soya's ears buzz long after they have passed the section of garden where bees hum between the floral displays. De Soya focuses on the tall, elderly man who is leading him with such a brisk pace. Oddi is very tall, and he seems to glide forward, his legs making little noise within the long cassock. The Monsignor's face is thin and crafty, lines and wrinkles molded by many decades of amusement, the long beak of his nose seeming to sniff the Vatican air for humor and rumor. De Soya has heard the jokes about Monsignor Audi and Cardinal Lordusamy, the tall, funny man and the huge, crafty man, how together they might look almost comical if it were not for the truly terrifying power they wield. De Soya is momentarily surprised when they come out of the garden and step into one of the outside... Oh gosh, let's try that again. De Soya is momentarily surprised when they come out of the garden and step into one of the outside elevators that rise to the loggias. I think that's a... loggias. 2 G's. Loggias. Yes, because it's lodgings, probably. I'm not actually sure what a loggia is. Loggia, plural. No, I'm blanking on it. De Soya is momentarily surprised when they come out of the garden and step into one of the outside elevators that rise to the loggias of the Vatican Palace. Swiss Guard troopers, resplendent in their ancient uniforms of red, blue, and orange stripes, snap to attention as they step into and then out of the wire mesh elevator cages. The troopers here carry long pikes, but De Soya remembers that these can be used as pulse rifles.
You remember that His Holiness, during his first resurrection, decided to reoccupy this level because of his fondness for his namesake, Julius II, says Monsignor Audi, gesturing down the long corridor with an easy sweep of his hand. Yes, says De Soya. His heart is pounding rapidly. Pope Julius II, the famous warrior pope who had commissioned the Sistine ceiling during his reign from AD 1503 to 1513, had been the first to live in these rooms. Now Pope Julius, in all of his incarnations from Julius VI to Julius XIV, has lived and ruled here almost 27 times as long as the decade of that first warrior pope. Certainly he could not be meeting the Holy Father. De Soya manages an outward calm as they start down the great corridor, but his palms are moist and his breathing is rapid. We are going to see the Secretariat, of course, says Audi, smiling. But if you have not seen the papal apartments, this is a pleasant walk. His Holiness is meeting with the Interstellar Synod of Bishops in the smaller hall of the Nervi building all this day.
De Soya nods attentively, but in truth... Oh, sorry, there's an extra comma there. De Soya nods attentively, but, in truth, his attention is focused on Raphael... I see. His attention is focused on Raphael Stanza, Okay. De Soya nods attentively, but, in truth, his attention is focused on the Raphael Stanza he is glimpsing through open doors of... It is not through the open... De Soya nods attentively, but, in truth, his attention is focused on the Raphael stanza he is glimpsing through the open doors of the papal apartments as they pass. He knows the outlines of the history. Pope Julius II had grown tired of the old-fashioned frescoes by such minor geniuses as Piero della Francesca and Andrea del Castagno, so in the fall of 1508 he had brought a 26-year-old genius from Urbino, Raffaello Sanzio, also known as Raphael. One of my favorite Ninja Turtles. De Soya can see the stanza del... I'm going to try this again. I do see that you left a message, Severo. I will get to it in a minute. Let's try this one more time. Have I mentioned that Italian is not my first language? De Soya can see the stanza della segnatura, with its overwhelming fresco representing the triumph of religious truth, contrasted with the triumph of philosophical and scientific truth.
Ah,
says Monsignor Oddi, pausing so that De Soya can stand and stare a moment.
You like it, eh? You see Plato there among the philosophers?
Yes, says De Soya.
Do you know to whom the likeness actually belonged? Who the model was?
No, says De Soya.
Leonardo da Vinci, says the Monsignor with a hint of a smile. And Heraclitus, see him there? Do you know whom Raphael depicted from life?
De Soya can only shake his head. He is remembering the tiny adobe Maria Est chapel on his homeworld, with the sand always blowing in under the doors and pooling under the simple statue of the Virgin.
Heraclitus was Michelangelo, says Monsignor Oddi, and Euclid there, you see him, that was Bramante. Come in, come closer.
De Soya can hardly bear to set foot on the rich tapestry of carpet. The frescoes, statuary, gilded molding, and tall windows of the room seem to whirl about him.
You see these letters on Bramante's collar here? Come, lean closer. Can you read them, my son?
R-U-S-M, reads De Soya.
Yes, yes,
chuckles Monsignor Lucas Oddi.
Raphael Urbinus sua manu. Come, come, my son. Translate for an old man. You have had your review lesson in Latin for this week, I believe.
Raphael of Urbino, translates De Soya, muttering more to himself than the taller man, by his hand.
Yes, come along. We shall take the papal lift down to the apartments. We must not keep the secretary waiting.
The Borgia apartment takes up much of the ground floor of this wing of the palace. They enter through the tiny chapel of Nicholas V, and Father Captain de Soya thinks that he has never seen any work of man lovelier than this small room. The frescoes here were painted by Fra Angelico between A.D. 1447 and 1449, and are the essence of simplicity, the avatar of purity. Beyond the chapel, the rooms of the Borgia apartment become darker and more ominous, much as the ensuing history of the church had grown darker under the Borgia popes. But by room 4, that is, Roman numeral 4, Pope Alexander's study, dedicated to the sciences and the liberal arts, de Soya begins to appreciate the power of the rich color, the extravagant applications of gold leaf, and the sumptuous uses of stucco. Room 5, also Roman numeral 5, explores the lives of the saints through fresco and statuary, yet has a stylized, inhuman feel to it, which de Soya associates with old pictures he has seen of old earth Egyptian art. Room the 6th, the Pope's dining room, according to the Monsignor, Room the 6th, the Pope's dining room, according to the Monsignor, explores the mysteries of the faith in an explosion of color and figures that literally takes de Soya's breath away. Monsignor Oddi pauses by a huge fresco of the Resurrection and points 2 fingers toward a secondary figure whose intense piety can be felt through the centuries and faded oils.
Pope Alexander VI,
Oddi says softly,
the second of the Borgia popes.
He flicks his hand almost negligently toward 2 men standing nearby in the thickly populated fresco. Both have the lighting and expressions reserved for saints.
Cesar Borgia, says Oddi. Pope Alexander's bastard son. The man next to him is Cesar's brother, whom he murdered. The Pope's daughter, Lucrezia, was in room 5. You may have missed her. The Virgin Saint Catherine of Alexandria.
De Soya can only stare. He looks up at the ceiling and sees the design that has appeared in each of these rooms, the brilliant bull and crown that were the Borgia emblems.
Pinturicchio painted all this,
says Monsignor Oddi, on the move again now.
His real name was Bernardino di Beto, and he was quite mad, possibly a servant of darkness.
The Monsignor pauses to look back into the room as Swiss guards snap to attention.
And most certainly a genius, he says softly. Come, it is time for your appointment.
Cardinal Lord Ducemy awaits behind a long, low desk in room 6, the Sala dei Pontifici, the so-called Room of the Popes. The huge man does not rise, but shifts sideways in his chair as Father Captain de Soya is announced and allowed to approach. De Soya goes to one knee and kisses the cardinal's ring. Lord Dusamy pats the priest captain on the head and waves away any further formality.
Take that chair, my son. Get comfortable. I assure you that little chair is more comfortable than this straight-backed throne they found for me.
De Soya has almost forgotten the power of the cardinal's voice. It is a great bass rumbling that seems to come up out of the earth as much as from the large man's body. Lord Dusamy is huge, a great mass of red silk, white linen, and crimson velvet, a geological massif of a man culminating in the large head atop layers of jowls, the small mouth, tiny, lively eyes, and almost hairless skull set off by the crimson skullcap.
Federico, rumbles the cardinal, I am so pleased and delighted that you have come through so many deaths and troubles without harm. You look well, my son. Tired, but well.
Thank you, Your Excellency, says de Soya. Monsignor Oddi has taken a chair to the priest-captain's left, a bit farther away from the cardinal's desk.
And I understand you went before the tribunal of the Holy Office yesterday, rumbles Cardinal Lord Dusamy, his eyes piercing into de Soya. Yes, Your Excellency. No thumbscrews, I hope. No iron maidens or hot irons. Or did they have you on the rack?
The cardinal's chuckle seems to echo in the man's huge chest. No, Your Excellency. De Soya manages a smile.
Good, good,
says the cardinal, the light from a fixture 10 meters overhead gleaming on his ring. He leans closer and smiles.
When His Holiness ordered the Holy Office to take back its old title, the Inquisition, a few of the non-believers thought that the days of madness and terror within the Church had returned. But now they know better, Federico. The Holy Office's only power is in its role of giving advice to the orders of the Church. Its only punishment is to recommend excommunication.
De Soya licks his lips. But that is a terrible punishment, Your Excellency.
Yes,
agrees Cardinal Lord Dusamy, and the banter is gone from his voice.
Terrible, but not one you have to worry about, my son. This incident is over. Your name and reputation have been fully exonerated. The report the tribunal shall send to His Holiness clears you of any blemish larger than, shall we say, a certain insensitivity to the feelings of a certain provincial bishop with enough friends in the Curia to demand this hearing.
De Soya does not let out his breath yet. Bishop Melandriano is a thief, Your Excellency. Lord Dusamy's lively eyes flick toward Monsignor Oddi and then return to the priest-captain's face.
Yes, yes, Federico. We know that. We have known that for some time. The good bishop on his remote floating city on that watery world shall have his time before the Lord Cardinals of the Holy Office. Be assured. You also may be assured that the recommendation in his case will not be so lenient.
The cardinal settled back into his high-backed chair. Ancient wood creaked.
But we must talk of other things, my son. Are you ready to resume your mission?
Yes, Your Excellency. De Soya is surprised by the immediacy and sincerity of his answer. Until that second, he had thought it best that this part of his life and service was over. Cardinal Lord Dusamy's expression grows more serious. The great jowls seem to become firmer.
Excellent. Now, I understand that one of your troopers died during your expedition to Hebron.
An accident during resurrection, Your Excellency, says de Soya. Lord Dusamy is shaking his head.
Terrible, terrible.
Lancer Rettig, adds Father Captain de Soya, feeling that the man's name needs to be spoken. He was a good soldier. The cardinal's small eyes glint as if from tears. He looks directly at de Soya as he says,
His parents and sister will be taken care of. Lancer Rettig had a brother who rose to the rank of priest commander on Brescia. Did you know that, my son?
No, Your Excellency, says de Soya. Lord Dusamy nods.
A great loss.
The Cardinal sighs and sets a plump hand on the empty desktop. De Soya sees the dimples in the back of the hand and looks at it as if it is its... Oh, Lord, that's a lot of two-letter words. De Soya sees the dimples in the back of the hand and looks at it as if it is... Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh, my brain does not like that. Looks at it as if it is its... There we go. Holy Spinoli. De Soya sees the dimples on the back of the hand and looks at it as if it is its own entity, some boneless creature from the sea. No, seriously, at it as if it is its. Oh, Lord. I don't know. Maybe some editing would have been in order for that. For ease of reading. De Soya sees the dimples in the back of the hand and looks at it as if it is its own entity, some boneless creature from the sea. I don't care what they write about me on the back of the bathroom wall. They're both right and wrong, but I am damn good.
Federico, rumbles Lord Dusamy, we have a suggestion for someone to fill the vacancy on your ship left by Lancer Rettig's death. But first we must discuss the reason for this mission. Do you know why we must find and detain this young female?
De Soya sits straight up. Your Excellency... De Soya sits straight up. Your Excellency explained that the girl was a child of a cybrid abomination, he says, that she poses a threat to the Church itself, that she may well be an agent of the AI Technocore. Lord Dusamy is nodding.
All true, Federico, all true. But we did not tell you precisely how she is a threat, not only to the Church and the Pax, but to all humanity. If we are to send you back out there on this mission, my son, you have the right to know.
Outside, their volume muffled but still audible through the palace windows and walls, come two sudden and disparate sounds. In the same instant, the midday cannon is fired from the Janiculum Hill along the river toward Tratevere, and the clocks of St. Peter's begin to strike the noon hour. Lord Dusamy pauses, removes an ancient watch from the folds of his crimson robe, nods as if satisfied, winds it, and returns it to its place. De Soya waits. All right, let's read that message. I do see messages sent. Severo says, "Hey Frag, are there any sci-fi novel series that you believe have big potential to bring to being the next up big movie franchise?" Ones that would be mangled, or ones that would like actually work? Probably yes. So I know that Blind Sight by Peter Watts is getting turned into a mini-series. That's being actively worked on. I have to check to see what the status on that is. I mean, you could definitely do The Culture, but I don't think it would survive the transition, so I'd kind of prefer it not. One that would easily work, though it's not a series, is Red Noise by... somebody whose name I can't read from here. John P. Murphy. Very, very easy to make into a functional movie. There it goes. Sorry about that. No, thank you for calling me on that. My microphone is really sensitive to things happening to the cable, so if I like move it around too much, it says no, I don't like that. The cable's ancient, so it's like not well insulated, so it's probably a surge protection mechanism. It's also a really old microphone. It's better than the one I was using. So yeah, I think the culture's probably out. You could probably, you could probably do make a decent movie series out of. Hyperion would be really easy to turn into a movie series, but or a TV series. But I kind of don't want it to happen, mostly because of the way it's set up. I think would. You could definitely do the first book as a series, the second book as a series, where like each episode of the first book is like one of the perspective character things, and then you have the rest of it. But I don't think people are ready for that because they'd be accustomed to one thing and not get it. Mostly, it's kind of a narrative structure issue with that one. That would be kind of tough to make work. Let's see. One I have some hope for getting some kind of an adaptation would actually be the fantasy series The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett, which I do kind of want to get around to reading on stream at some point. I rather enjoyed it. He's enjoyed a certain degree of success in the wake of that series. And I'm happy for him for that, because I enjoyed myself. It's not, like, massively groundbreaking, but it's solid. Oh, gosh. There's a couple. But of course, when I try to think on them, my brain just disappears. Oh, I haven't seen the Apple TV Foundation adaptation. I keep meaning to do that. I have completely ignored the new Dune TV series because there's a number of reasons why, but most of them boil down to me not being terribly thrilled with the Dune IP, if you want to call it that, under our good friend Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, and that TV series is kind of that stuff there, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm good. Doomrider67 says, "Hey Frag, just want to hop in and say thanks for still doing these readouts, whatever. You helped me listen to some amazing novels at the gym, awesome. Many of which I couldn't have ever found the time to finish. Cheers. Cheers to you too." I could definitely see making stuff for the culture, but I would like its general thematics to remain intact, and I don't know how you do that. Alistair Reynolds, I think you could. What's that series? He's got like a. What is it called? My brain isn't working well right now. Alistair Reynolds has a bunch of novels you could convert into movies very easily, as sort of like a sci-fi horror type affair. Oh my gosh, what is that called? He has a series of books, and they're pretty good. Another one I'd like to see made into a movie, though, and I don't normally do this, but it stands on its own well enough, what is the title so I don't mongle it? Where are you? The series I'd like to see something done with is the Uplift series by David Brin. And I don't think the odds on that are terribly good. Mostly because it is long enough and the installments require proper context. Like, I don't know how you explain in movie format the context of that series. For any of the entries, even like the earliest ones are kind of like very much based on how interested are you in learning about the context of what's going on here. I think that's actually kind of an issue with a bunch of series that I'd love to see some adaptation on, is like, how do you establish, without a background narrator telling you, what the context is of what's going on in a way that the movie-going public can appreciate, or series-watching public can appreciate. And I don't really know how you do that. Another standalone I'd actually like to see turned into a movie is a book called Body Scout. It's a cyberpunk thriller, kind of sort of a murder mystery. It's one I also want to get around to reading on stream. It's basically about a future sports talent scout who's like kind of a has-been, used to be, in the game, but as, science marches forward, you eventually get outclassed and you can't keep adapting yourself forever, so you have to find people who are naturally talented, as well as capable of taking on the augmentations and whatnot that are necessary. And it winds up being kind of this murder mystery type affair, kind of a crime noir thing. What is the author of that one? I can't read it from here. I'll look it up later if I am reminded. But that one's cute. I recommend. So I'll definitely be reading that one aloud. Let's see. Armor by John Stakely would work easily as a movie. But it'll never happen. Vampires, his only other novel, as far as I'm aware, did, with a $sign for the S, did get adapted by John Carpenter. It unfortunately kind of makes a hash of it, regrettably. It's a fun, dumb action movie. I'd put it in a somewhat less fun-loving category than, say, Ghosts of Mars, which I realize is a rather divisive movie. I know when I first watched Ghosts of Mars, when it first came out, I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. How could it have been made? And then when I did a rewatch of it not so long ago, I was like, you know what? I think I finally get it. It is just dumb fun trying to be fun and dumb. But the Vampires movie is not. Part of it's that it has James Woods as the lead, and I don't know. There's something about that guy. It kind of rubs me the wrong way. So it's sort of tough. Also, like, people are just mean in that movie in ways that aren't really the same in the book. Anyway. There's a couple recent books that I think you could Adrian Tchaikovsky did a book called Alien Clay, and that one I think you could do as kind of a more understandable. Actually, you know what? We're primed and ready for it. We're primed and ready as a people, as Amerikanskis anyway, to appreciate Alien Clay. I'm going to have to fast-track reading that one, because it is quite good, and its thematics are appropriate to current era, unfortunately. That one I could see happening. It is 1984 in space. It is more than that. It is 1984 in space by way of annihilation. Sort of, but not quite as weird, but pretty weird. Oh, you just finished Alien Clay. Nice, nice, nice. Nice, nice, nice. 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 I read it when I was, actually not that long ago I read it. I've had it for a while, but I hadn't gotten around to reading it until very recently. And I was like, oh yes, I can pick them. I am pleased by this. So I will get around to reading Alien Clay on stream. It's not going to be for a while, because I've booked myself out with, at the very least, with Cytine and Regenesis after we get through all this. But we will get around to it. As well as Red Noise, as well as probably this book by, I can't read the author name from here, a book named Flux by an Asian author. Quite good. I can't describe it to you yet, because doing so sort of spoils the whole thing, so I wouldn't read you a description. Suffice it to say, it is a book that is a massive slow burn. It takes a very long time to get around to what's the point here, but it is a kind of this really interesting character study book. And it's about sort of like, what was her name? The what? Why do I always forget this woman's name? The woman who managed to scam a whole bunch of investors out of a ton of money a couple of years back. I forget her name all the time. And there's so many other people like her, but she stood out. It's about... They're not the main character, but it's about someone who gets into the orbit of one of those people. And it's kind of an interesting character study of not that person, but the person in their orbit. There's a couple others. Actually, a book I'm reading now that I'd like to see adapted is a book called The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. And I'll talk more about that later so I can actually get... Elizabeth Holmes sounds right, yes. Yes, Elizabeth Holmes. You can do that. I don't mind interrupting myself partway through. We're like halfway through what I'll be due for a reading for today anyway. So it's okay. It's fine. So let's get resuming on. I apologize to anyone tuning in late. I do respond to people asking questions, though. We're in between chapters. Let me get some more water on me. Gulp. Loud, noisy, slurpy noise. I'm so sorry. 42. Let's try that again, with proper gravitas. 42. It took us a little more than a day to walk the ice tunnels to Father Glaucus and the buried city, but there were 3 short sleep periods during that time, and the voyage itself, darkness, cold, narrow passages through the ice, would have been quite forgettable if the Wraith had not taken one of our party. As with all real acts of violence, it happened too quickly to observe. 1 second we were trudging along, Ania, the android, and I, near the back of the single-file line of Chitchatuk, and suddenly there was an explosion of ice and movement. I froze, thinking that an explosive mine had been set off, and the robed figure 2 forms in front of Ania disappeared without a cry. I was still frozen, the plasma rifle in my mittened hands, but useless, its safety still on, when the nearest Chitchatuk began ululating in rage and helplessness, the closest hunters throwing themselves down the new corridor that opened where none had been a second before. Ania was already shining her hand lamp down the nearly vertical shaft when I pushed next to her, my weapon raised. 2 of the Chitchatuk hurled themselves down the shaft, breaking their fall with their boots and their short bone knives, throwing ice splint. Okay, let's do this again, where I'm not stumbling over every other word. Ania was already shining her hand lamp down the nearly vertical shaft when I pushed next to her, my weapon raised. 2 of the Chitchatuk had hurled themselves down that shaft, breaking their fall with their boots and their short bone knives, throwing ice splinters above them, and I was about to squeeze in when Kuchiat grabbed my shoulder. "Che!" he said. "Kuk-cheta-chi!" By this 4th day I knew that he was ordering me not to go. I obeyed, but brought out the flashlight laser to illuminate the way for the shouting hunters already 20 meters below us, and out of sight where the new tunnel curved away to the horizontal. At first I thought it was an effect of the red laser beam, but then I saw that the shaft was coated, almost totally painted, in bright blood. The ululation among the Chitchatuk continued even after the hunters returned empty-handed. I understood that there had been no sight of the Wraith, and no sight of its victim except for blood, shredded robe, and the little finger from her right hand. Kuchtu, the one we thought of as the medicine man, knelt, kissed the severed digit, brought a bone knife across his forearm until his own blood dripped on the bloody finger, and then carefully, almost reverently, set the finger in his hide bag. The ululation stopped immediately. Chiaku, the tall man with the blood-stained robe that was twice blood-stained now, since he had been one of the hunters who had thrown himself down the shaft, turned to us and spoke earnestly for a long moment while the others shouldered their packs, set their spears away, and resumed the trek. As we continued up the ice tunnel, I could not help but glance back and see the wraith's jagged entrance hole fade into the blackness that seemed to follow us. Knowing that the animals lived on the surface and came below mostly to hunt, I had not been nervous. But now the very ice of the floor seemed treacherous, the ice facets and ridges of the walls and ceilings mere hunting blinds for the next wraith. I found that I was trying to walk lightly, as if that would keep me from falling through to where the killer waited. It was not easy to walk lightly on Sol Draconi's septum. Anea, said the robed figure of Abetic. I could not understand what Chiaku was saying. Something about numbers? Anea's face was all but lost under the wraith teeth of her robe. I had known that all these robes were taken from wraith cubs, infants, but the one glimpse of white arms the thickness of my torso, coming through the ice wall, black talons the length of my forearm, made me realize how large these things must be. Sometimes, I realized, the safety off on my plasma Oh, jeez, okay. He's doing one of these weird sentences. It's okay, I understand. Part of it's me just being a spaz or something. Sometimes I realized the safety off on my plasma rifle, trying to walk lightly in the grinding weight of Sol Draconi's septum, the shortest route to courage is absolute ignorance. So I think he was talking about the fact that the band no longer comprises a prime number, Anea was saying to Abetic. Until she was taken, we had 26, which was all right, but now they have to do something soon, or, I don't know, more bad luck. Oh, because they would be 29 with Anea, Betic, and Raul, which is a prime number. Okay. I was like, what do you mean it would prime number? It's like, no. Before those three. Got it. As far as I could tell, they solved the prime number jinx by sending Chiaku ahead as a scout. Or perhaps he just volunteered to be apart from the group until they could drop us off in the frozen city. 25, as an odd number, could be tolerated briefly, but without us their band would be back to 22, still an unacceptable number. I left behind all thoughts of the Chitchatuk's preoccupation with primes when we arrived at the city. First, we saw the light. After just a few days, our eyes had grown so accustomed to the ember glow of the Chuchkituk, the mitre-shaped bone brazier, that even the occasional flash of our hand lamps seemed blinding. The light from the frozen city was actually painful. At one time, the building had been steel or plasteel and smart glass, perhaps 70 stories tall, and must have looked out at a pleasant green terraformed valley, perhaps looking south to where the river flowed half a kilometer away. Now our ice tunnel opened onto a hole in the glass somewhere around the 58th floor, and tongues of the atmospheric glacier had bent the steel frame of the building and found inroads on various levels. But the skyscraper still stood, perhaps with its upper stories protruding into the black near vacuum of the surface above the glacier, and it still blazed with light. The Chitchatuk paused at the entrance, shielding their eyes from the glare and ululating in a different tone from that of their earlier morning Excuse me, that's morning with a U. The Chitchatuk paused at the entrance, shielding their eyes from the glare and ululating in a different tone from that of their earlier morning wail in the tunnel when the woman had been taken. This was a beckoning. While we stood and waited, I stared at the open steel and glass skeleton of the place. at the dozens upon dozens of burning lamps hung everywhere here, floor after floor, so that we could stare down beneath our feet through the clear ice and see the building dropping away beneath us, windows brightly lit. Then Father Glaucus ambled toward us across the space that was half ice cavern, half office building room. He wore the long black cassock and crucifix that I associated with the Jesuits at their monastery near Port Romance. It was obvious that the old man was blind. His eyes were milky with cataracts and as unseeing as stones, but that was not the first thing that struck me about Father Glaucus. He was old, ancient, hoary, bearded like a patriarch, and when Kuchiat called to him, his features came alive, and he awoke as if from a trance, his snow-white brows arching up, ploughing wrinkles into his large forehead. Chapped and weathered lips curled up in a smile. This may sound grotesque, but nothing about Father Glaucus was bizarre in any way. Not his blindness, not the blindingly white beard, not the weathered, mottled old man's skin or withered lips. He was so much himself that comparisons fail. I had many reservations about meeting this Glaucus, afraid that he would have some association with the packs we were fleeing, and now, having seen that he was a priest, I should have grabbed the girl and Abetic and left with the Chitchatuk. But none of the three of us had that impulse at all. The old man was not the packs. He was only Father Glaucus. This we learned only minutes after our first encounter. But first, before any of us spoke, the blind priest seemed to sense our presence. After speaking to Kuchiat and Chichtiku in their own tongue, he suddenly swiveled our way, holding one hand high as if his palm could sense our heat, Aenea's, Abetic's, and mine. Then he crossed the small space to where we stood at the boundary between encroaching ice cavern and encroached-upon room. Father Glaucus walked directly up to me, set his bony hand on my shoulder, and said, loudly and clearly in web English, "Thou art the man!"
Be banished to the Netherlands, but...
It took me a while, years, to put that comment in the proper perspective. At the time, I simply thought the old priest was mad as well as blind. The arrangement was for us to stay a few days with Father Glaucus in his subglacial high-rise while the Chitchatuk went off to do important Chitchatuk things. Aeneas and I guessed that settling the prime number problem was their highest priority, and then the band would check back on us. Aeneas and I had succeeded in communicating via signs that we wanted to take the raft apart and carry it downriver to the next Farcaster portal. The Chitchatuk seemed to understand, or at least they had nodded and used their word for assent, "Tcha," when we pantomimed the second arch and the raft passing through it. If I had understood their signed and verbal response, the trip to the second Farcaster would require traveling across the surface, would take several days, and would pass through an area of many Arctic wraiths. I was sure that they said we would discuss it again after they acted on their immediate need of going off to, quote, seek insoluble balance, which we guessed meant finding another member for the band, or losing 3. The last thought gave one pause. At any rate, we were to stay with Father Glaucus until Kuchiat's band returned. The blind priest chatted animatedly with the hunters for several minutes, and then stood at the opening of the ice cave, obviously listening, until the glow of their bone brazier had long since disappeared. Then Father Glaucus greeted us again by passing his hands across our faces, shoulders, arms, and hands. I confess that I had never experienced an introduction quite like it. When he cupped Aeneas' face in his bony hands, the old man said, "A human child! I had never expected to see a human child's face again." I did not understand. "What about the Chitchatuk?" I said. "They're human. They must have children." Father Glaucus had led us deeper into the skyscraper and up a flight of stairs to a warmer room before our introductions. This was obviously a living area for him. Lanterns and braziers burned brightly with the same glowing pellets that the Chichetuk used, only there were hundreds more here. Comfortable furniture was set around, there was an ancient music disc player, and the inner walls were lined with books, which I found incongruous in the home of a blind man.
"The Chichetuk have children," said the old priest, "but they do not allow them to stay with the bands that roam this far north."
"Why?" I said.
"The wraiths," said Father Glaucus. "There are so many wraiths north of the old terraforming line."
"I thought the Chichetuk depended upon the wraiths for everything," I said. The old man nodded and stroked his beard. It was full, white, and long enough to hide his Roman collar. His cassock was carefully patched and darned, but still frayed and threadbare. Golly.
"My friends the Chichetuk depend upon wraith cubs for everything," he said. "The metabolism of the adults makes their hides and bones worthless for the band's purposes."
I did not understand this, but I let him continue without interruption.
"The wraiths, on the other hand, love nothing more than Chichetuk children," he said. It is why Chichetuk and the others are so puzzled by our young friend's presence this far north."
"Where are their children?"
"Where are their children?" asked Aeneas. "Oh, many hundreds of kilometers south," said the priest, "with the child-rearing bands. It is tropical there. The ice is only 30 or 40 meters thick, and the atmosphere there is almost breathable."
Why don't the wraiths hunt the children there?" I asked.
"It is poor country for the wraiths, far too warm."
Then why don't all the Chichetuk play it safe and move south?" I began, and stopped. The heavy G-load and cold must have been making me more stupid than I usually was.
"Exactly," said Father Glaucus, hearing the comprehension in my silence. "The Chichetuk totally depend upon the wraiths. The hunting bands, like our friend Kuchiats, risk terrible odds to provide the child-rearing bands with meat, hide, and tools. The child-rearing bands run a chance of starving before the food is provided. The Chichetuk have few children, but those few are precious to them. Or, as they would say, Uchai tuk aichit chat chukutchit. Chakutkuchit, sorry. Or, as they would say, Uchai tuk aichit chat kuchit.
"More sacred, I think the word is, than warmth," translated Aeneas.
"Precisely," said the old priest. "But I am forgetting my manners. I shall show you all to your quarters. I keep several rooms furnished and heated, although you are my first non-Chichetuk guests for 5 standard decades, I believe. While you settle in, I shall start warming our dinners."
"43. In the middle of his explanation of the real reason for de Soya's mission, Cardinal Lordusamy leans back in his throne and waves his plump hand toward the distant ceiling.
What do you think of this room, Federico?
Father Captain de Soya, poised to hear something vitally important, can only blink and lift his face. This great hall is as ornate as the others in the Borgia apartment. More ornate, he realizes, for the colors are livelier, more vibrant. And then he sees the difference. These tapestries and frescoes are more current, depicting Pope Julius VI receiving the cruciform from an angel of the Lord, another showing God reaching down, in an echo of Michelangelo's ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, to confer the sacrament of resurrection on Julius. He sees the evil antipope, Teilhard I, being banished by an archangel with a flaming sword. Other ceiling images and wall tapestries proclaim the glory of the first great century of the Church's own resurrection and Pax expansion.
The original ceiling in here collapsed in AD 1500. rumbles Cardinal Lord Ducemy, almost killing Pope Alexander. Most of the original decoration was destroyed. Leo X had it replaced after the death of Julius II, but the work was inferior to the original. His Holiness commissioned the new work 130 standard years ago. Notice the central fresco. It is by Haljan Gena of Renaissance Vector. The Pax Ascending tapestry, there, is by Shiroku. The architectural restoration was by the cream of Pachem's own artisans, including Peter Bain's Court Bilgroth.
De Soya nods politely, having no clue as to how this relates to what they were discussing. Perhaps the Cardinal, as is true of many men and women of power, has become used to digressing at will because his underlings never protest the loss of focus. As if reading the priest-captain's mind, Lord Ducemy chuckles and sets his soft hand on the leather surface of the table.
I mention this for a reason, Federico. Would you agree that the Church and Pax have brought an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity to humanity?
De Soya pauses. He has read history, but is not sure if this era has been unprecedented. And as for peace, memories of burning orbital forests and ravaged worlds still haunt his dreams. The Church and its Pax allies have certainly improved the situation for most of the former web worlds I have visited, Your Excellency, he says, and no one can deny the unprecedented gift of resurrection. Lord Ducemy's throat rumbles with amusement.
The saints save us. A diplomat!
The Cardinal rubs his thin upper lip.
Yes, you are perfectly correct, Federico. Every age has its shortcomings, and ours includes a constant struggle against the ousters, and an even more urgent struggle to establish the reign of our Lord and Saviour in the hearts of all men and women. But, as you see...
His hand gestures once again toward the frescoes and tapestries.
We are in the midst of a Renaissance every bit as real as that imbued with the spirit of the early Renaissance, which gave us the chapel of Nicholas V and the other wonders you saw on the way in. And this Renaissance is truly one of the spirit, Federico.
De Soya waits.
This abomination will destroy all that, says Lord Ducemy, his voice deadly serious now. As I said to you 1 year ago, this is not a child we seek, it is a virus, and we know now whence that virus comes.
De Soya listens.
Our Holiness has had one of his visions, the Cardinal says in a voice so soft it is just above a whisper. You are aware, Federico, that the Holy Father is often visited by dreams granted by God?
I have heard rumors, Your Excellency. This magical aspect of the Church has always had the least appeal to De Soya. He weeps. Lord Ducemy waves his hand as if brushing away the sillier rumors.
It is true that His Holiness has received vital revelations after much prayer, much fasting, and exhibiting the utmost humility. Such a revelation was the source of our knowledge on when and where the child would appear on Hyperion. His Holiness was correct to the moment, was he not?
De Soya bows his head.
And it was one of these sacred revelations which prompted the Holy Father to ask for you in this service, Federico. He saw that your fate and the salvation of our Church and society were inextricably entwined.
Father Captain de Soya can only stare without blinking.
And now, rumbles Cardinal Lord Ducemy, the threat to the future of humankind has been revealed in much greater detail.
The Cardinal rises to his feet, but when de Soya and Monsignor Oddi hurry to stand, the huge man waves them back to their chairs. De Soya sits and watches the giant mass of red and white move through the pools of light in the dark room, the flesh of the Cardinal's cheeks gleaming, his small eyes lost in shadows from the overhead spots.
This is indeed the AI Technocore's great attempt at our destruction, Federico. The same mechanical evil which destroyed old Earth, which preyed upon humanity's minds and souls through their parasitic farcasters, and which prompted the ouster attack that presaged the fall. The same evil is at work here. The cybrid offspring, this Ania, is their instrument. That is why the Farcasters have worked for her when they admit no one else. That is why the Shrike demon slayed thousands of our people, and soon may slay millions, perhaps billions. Unless stopped, this succubus will succeed in returning us to the rule of the machine.
De Soya watches the great red form of the cardinal move from light to dark. None of this is new. Lord Dusamy stops his pacing.
But His Holiness now knows that this cybrid spawn is not only the agent of the core, Federico. She is the instrument of the machine god.
De Soya understands. When the Inquisition had queried him about the cantos, his insides had turned to jelly at the thought of punishment for having read the banned poem. But even this book on the index... But even this book on the index admitted that the elements of the AI core had been working for centuries to produce an ultimate intelligence, a cybernetic deity that would spread its power back through time to dominate the universe. Indeed, both the cantos and official church history acknowledged the battle across time between this false god and our Lord. The Keats cybrids, actually, since there had been a replacement after one sect of the core destroyed the first one in the megasphere, had been falsely represented as a candidate for the messiah of the human UI, that blasphemous Teilhardian concept of an evolved human god, in the prohibited cantos. That poem had talked about empathy being the key to human spiritual evolution. The Church had corrected that, pointing out that obeying God's will was the source of revelation and salvation.
Through revelation, Lord Dusamy says, His Holiness knows where the cybrid spawn and her dupes are at this very moment.
De Soya sits forward. Where, Your Excellency?
On the abandoned ice world of Sol Draconi Septem, rumbles the Cardinal. His Holiness is quite clear on that, and he is quite clear on the consequences if she is not stopped.
Lord Dusamy walks around the long desk and stands next to the priest captain. De Soya looks up to see gleaming red, brilliant white, the tiny eyes boring into him.
She runs now to find allies, comes the Cardinal's sincere growl. Allies to help in the destruction of the Pax and the desecration of the Church. To this moment she has been like a deadly virus in an empty region, a potential danger but containable. Soon, if she escapes us now, she shall grow to maturity and full power, the full power of the Evil One.
Above the Cardinal's gleaming shoulder, De Soya can see the writhing figures of the ceiling fresco.
Every one of the old Forecaster portals will open simultaneously, rumbles the red form. The Shrike demon, in 1,000,000 iterations, will step through to slaughter Christians. The ousters will be empowered by technocore weapons and terrible AI technologies. Already they have used subcellular machinery to make themselves something more and less than human. Already they have traded their immortal souls for the machinery to adapt to space, to eat sunlight, to exist like plants in darkness. Their war-making abilities will be augmented 1,000-fold by the core's secret engines. That hideous strength will not be denied, even by the Church. Billions will die the true death, their cruciforms torn from them, their souls ripped out of their bodies like beating hearts from living chests. Tens of billions will die. The ousters will burn their way across the Pax, laying waste like the Vandals and Visigoths, destroying Pacem, the Vatican, and everything we know. They will kill peace. They will deny life and desecrate our principle of the dignity of the individual.
De Soya sits and waits.
This does not have to happen,
says Secretariat Cardinal Lord Dusamy.
His Holiness prays every day that it will not happen. But these are perilous times, Federico. For the Church, for the Pax, for the future of the race of man. He has seen what may be, and has dedicated all our lives and sacred honors as princes of the Church to preventing the birth of such a terrible reality.
De Soya looks up as the Cardinal leans closer.
I must reveal something to you at this moment, Federico, which billions of the faithful will not learn for months. Today, this hour, at the Interstellar Synod of Bishops, His Holiness is announcing a crusade.
A crusade? Repeats De Soya. Even the unflappable Monsignor Oddi makes a low noise in his throat.
A crusade against the ouster menace,
rumbles Cardinal Lord Dusamy.
For centuries we have defended ourselves. The Great Wall is a defensive stratagem, putting Christian bodies and ships and lives in the way of the ouster aggression. But as of this day, by the grace of God, the Church and Pax will go on the offensive.
How? Says De Soya. He knows that the battles already rage in the no-man's land of grey space between the Pax and Ouster regions, filling thousands of parsecs with fleet lunge and parry, thrust and retreat. But with the time debt, the maximum voyage from Pacem to the farthest reaches of the Great Wall is 2 years of ship time, more than 20 years of time debt. There can be little or no coordination of either offense or defense. Lord Dusamy smiles grimly and answers,
Even as we speak, every world in the Pax and Protectorate is being asked, commanded, to devote planetary resources to build one great ship. One ship for each world.
We have thousands of ships, begins the priest captain, and stops.
Yes, purrs the Cardinal. These ships will use the new Archangel technology, but they will not be like your Raphael, a lightly armed courier, but the deadliest battle cruisers this spiral arm has ever seen, capable of translating anywhere in the galaxy in less time than it takes a dropship to rise to orbit. Each ship named after its homeworld, each staffed by devoted Pax officers such as yourself, men and women willing to suffer death and receive resurrection, and each capable of destroying entire swarms.
De Soya nods. Is this the Holy Father's answer to his revelation of the child's threat, Your Excellency? Lord Dusamy moves back around the desk and settles into his high-backed throne as if exhausted.
In part, Federico, in part. These new craft will begin to be built within the next standard decade. The technology is difficult, very difficult. Meanwhile, the Cybrid succubus continues to circulate disease like a spreading virus. That part depends upon you and your enhanced crew of virus seekers.
Enhanced? Repeats De Soya. May Sergeant Gregorius and Corporal Key still travel with me?
Yes, rumbles the Cardinal. They have already been assigned.
Where does the enhancement come in? asks de Soya, dreading the possibility that a cardinal from the Holy Office will be assigned to his mission. Cardinal Lordusamy opens his fat fingers as if lifting the lid of a treasure box.
Just one addition to your crew, Federico.
An officer of the church? Asks the priest captain, wondering if the papal disky is to be passed to a different commander. Lordusamy shakes his head. His great jowls flow with the movement.
A simple warrior, Father Captain de Soya. A new breed of warrior, bred for the renewed army of Christ.
De Soya does not understand. It sounds as if the Church is answering Ouster nanotechnology with biomodifications of its own. That would defy all of the Church doctrine de Soya has been taught. Once again, the Cardinal seems to read the priest captain's thoughts.
Nothing like that, Federico. Some augmentations, and much unique training from a new branch of the Pax military, but still totally human. And Christian.
One trooper? Says de Soya, mystified.
One warrior,
Says Lordusamy.
Not within the Pax fleet chain of command, the first member of the elite legions which shall spearhead the crusade that His Holiness will announce today.
De Soya rubs his chin. And will he be under my direct command, as Gregorius and Key have been?
Of course,
rumbles Lordusamy, sitting back and folding his hands on his ample stomach.
There will be just one change, as was deemed necessary by His Holiness in council with the Holy Office. She will have her own papal disky, for separate authority on military decisions and those actions deemed necessary for the preservation of the Church.
She, repeats de Soya, trying hard to understand this. If both he and this mystery warrior have equal papal authority, how can they make decisions at all? Every aspect of their quest for the child so far has had military facets and implications. Every decision he has made has been dedicated to the preservation of the Church. It would be better if he were simply dismissed and replaced than this false sharing of power. Before he can articulate this, Cardinal Lordusamy leans forward and speaks as softly as the bass rumble will allow.
Federico, His Holiness still sees you involved in this, and primarily responsible. But our Lord has revealed a terrible necessity which the Holy Father seeks to take from your hands, knowing you as the ultimate man of conscience you are.
Terrible necessity? Says de Soya, knowing with an immediate and total sinking feeling exactly what it is. Lordusamy's features are all bright light and deep shadow as he leans across the desk.
The cybrid-spawned succubus must be terminated, destroyed, the virus eradicated from the body of Christ as the first step toward the corrective surgery which is to come.
De Soya counts to 8 before speaking. I find the child, he says. This warrior kills her.
Yes,
says Lordusamy. There is no discussion of whether Father Captain de Soya will accept this modified mission. Born-again Christians, priests, Jesuits in particular, and Pax Fleet officers do not quibble when the Holy Father and the Holy Mother Church assign them duties. When do I meet this warrior, Your Excellency? Asks de Soya.
The Raphael will translate to Sol Draconi Septim this very afternoon.
The Raphael will translate to Sol Draconi Septim this very... Sol Draconi System, never mind. The Raphael will translate to Sol Draconi System. I'm going to struggle with that. It's clear. The Raphael will translate to Sol Draconi System this very afternoon.
pipes up Monsignor Audi from his place behind and to the left of de Soya.
"Your new crew member is already aboard."
"May I ask her name and rank?" says de Soya, turning to look at the tall Monsignor. Secretary Cardinal Simone Augustino Lordusami answers,
She has no formal rank as of yet, Father Captain de Soya. Eventually she will be an officer in the newly formed legions of the Crusade. As of now, you and your troopers may refer to her by her name.
de Soya waits.
Which is Nemes? Rumbles the Cardinal. Radamanth Nemes.
His small eyes flick to Lucas Audi. The Monsignor stands. De Soya hurries to his feet. The audience is obviously at an end. Lordusami's pudgy hand rises in a three-fingered benediction. De Soya bows his head.
May our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ keep you and preserve you and give you success on this most important of voyages. In the name of Jesus we ask this.
"Amen,"
murmurs Monsignor Lucas Audi. Amen, says de Soya. Sorry, I mispronounced her name. It's Radamth. Rhadamnth space Nemes. Nemes. More on her later.
Radamth.
44. It was not just a single building frozen in the ice. An entire city was buried here in Sol Draconi Septum's resublimated atmosphere, a small bit of the old hegemony's hubris frozen in place like an ancient insect locked in amber. Father Glaucus was a gentle, humorous, generous man. We soon learned that he had been exiled to Sol Draconi Septum as a punishment for belonging to one of the last Teilhardian orders of the Church. While his order had rejected the basic tenets of Teilhard after Julius VI had published a bull proclaiming the antipope's philosophy as blasphemy. Is that bull or bill? It's written as bull, but let's roll with it. While his order had rejected the basic tenets of Teilhard after Julius VI had published a bull proclaiming the antipope's philosophy as blasphemy, the order was dissolved and its members either excommunicated or sent to the ass ends of the Pax's dominion. Father Glaucus did not refer to his 57 standard years in this icy tomb as exile. He called it his mission. While admitting that none of the Chitchatuk had shown the slightest interest in converting, Father Glaucus confessed that he had little interest in converting them. He admired their courage, respected their honesty, and was fascinated with their hard-earned culture. Before he had become blind, snow blindness he called it, not simple cataracts, a combination of cold, vacuum, and hard radiation found on the surface, Father Glaucus had traveled with numerous Chitchatuk bands.
"There were more, then,"
said the old priest as we sat in his brightly lit study.
"Attrition had taken its toll. There were tens of thousands of the Chitchatuk in this region 50 years ago. Only a few hundred survive today."
Only a few hundred survive today. In the first day or two, while Aenea, Abetic, and the blind priest spoke, I spent much of my time exploring the frozen city. Father Glaucus illuminated 4 floors of one tall building with the fuel pellet lanterns.
"To keep away the wraiths," he said. "They hate the light."
I found a stairway and descended into the darkness with a hand lamp and my rifle ready. 20-some stories lower and a warren of ice tunnels led to the other buildings in the city. Decades earlier, Father Glaucus had marked the entrances to these buried structures with a light pen: warehouse, courthouse, communications center, hegemony dome, hotel, and so forth. I explored some of these, seeing signs of the priest's more recent visits here. On my third exploration, I found the deep vaults where the high-energy fuel pellets were stored. These were the source of both heat and light for the old priest, and they were also his principal bargaining chip to bring the Chitchatuk in to visit.
"The wraiths give them everything except combustible material," he had said. "The pellets give them light and a wee bit of heat. We enjoy the barter. They give me wraith meat and hides. I give them light and heat and garrulous conversation. I think they first began talking to me because my band consisted of the most elegant prime number, 1. In the early days, I used to hide the location of the cache. Now I know that the Chitchatuk would never steal from me, even if their lives depended on it, even if the lives of their children depended on it."
There was little else to see in the buried city. The darkness was absolute down here, and my hand lamp did little to dispel the gloom. If I had harbored hopes of finding some easy way to get us downriver to the second arch, a giant blowtorch perhaps, or a fusion borer, these hopes were soon dashed. The city was, with the exception of Father Glaucus's 4 floors of furniture, books, light, food, warmth, and conversation, as cold and dead as the 9th circle of hell. On our 3rd or 4th day there, just prior to our mealtime, I joined them in the old priest's study as they chatted. I had already gone over the books on the shelf, volumes of philosophy and theology, mysteries, astronomy texts, ethnology studies, new anthrotomes, adventure novels, carpentry guides, medical texts, zoology books.
"The greatest sadness of my blindness 30 years ago," Father Glaucus had said, that first day he proudly showed us his library, "was that I could no longer read my dear books. I am prospero denied. You can't imagine the time it took me to drag these 3,000 volumes up from the library 50 stories down."
As someone with a collection a bit smaller than that, I totally can. I can totally imagine, actually. Oh my god, the only thing worse, and by a lot, by so much worse, to move is boxes of LPs. Actual records. Oh my lord, those are heavy. Those are so fucking heavy, dude. Oh my god. Most of it is most of mine is inherited collection. I do pick up a couple new ones every now and again because they're relatively cheap. If it's from an artist I follow religiously. I don't do it all the time, but occasionally. Where were we? Ah, yes. In the afternoons, while I explored and Abetic went off to read by himself, Ania would read aloud to the old priest. Once, when I entered the room without knocking, I saw tears on the ancient missionary's cheeks. This day, when I joined them, Father Glaucus was explaining Teilhard, the original Jesuit, not the antipope whom Julius VI had supplanted.
"He was a stretcher-bearer in World War I, Father Glaucus was saying. "He could have been a chaplain and stayed out of the line of fire, but he chose to be a stretcher-bearer. They awarded him medals for his courage, including one called the Legion of Honor."
Abetic cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me, Father," he said softly. "Am I correct in assuming that the First World War was a pre-Hejira conflict limited to old Earth?" The bearded priest smiled.
Precisely, my dear friend. Early the 20th century, terrible conflict, terrible. And Teilhard was in the thick of it. His hatred of war lasted the rest of his life."
Father Glaucus had long ago built his own rocking chair, and now he rocked back and forth in front of the fuel pellet fire set in a crudely fashioned fireplace. The golden embers threw long shadows and more warmth than we had enjoyed since coming through the Farcaster portal.
Teilhard was a geologist and paleontologist. It was in China, a nation-state on old Earth, my friends, in the 1930s that he devised his theories that evolution was an uncompleted process, yet one with a design. He saw the universe as God's design to bring together the Christ of evolution, the personal and the universal, into a single conscious entity. Teilhard de Chardin saw every step of evolution as a hopeful sign, even mass extinctions as a cause for joy, with cosmogenesis, his word occurring when humanity became central to the universe, noogenesis as the continued evolution of man's mind, and hominization and ultra-hominization as the stages of Homo sapiens evolving to true humanity.
"Excuse me, Father," I heard myself saying, only slightly aware of the incongruity of this abstract discussion amid the frozen city, beneath the frozen atmosphere, surrounded by wraith killers and cold. But wasn't Teilhard's heresy that humankind could evolve into God? The blind priest shook his head, his expression still pleasant.
During his lifetime, my son, Teilhard was never sanctioned for heresy. In 1962, the Holy Office, it was quite a different Holy Office then, I assure you, issued a monitum.
"A what?" said Aeneas, who sat on the carpet near the fire.
A monitum is a warning against uncritical acceptance of his ideas,
said Father Glaucus.
And Teilhard did not say that human beings would become God. He said that the entire conscious universe was part of a process of evolving toward the day, he called it the Omega point, where all of creation, humanity included, would become one with the Godhead.
Would Teilhard have included the technocore in that evolution? Aeneas asked softly. She was hugging her knees. The blind priest stopped rocking and combed his fingers through his beard.
Teilhardian scholars have wrestled with that for centuries, my dear. I am no scholar, but I am certain that he would have included the core in his optimism.
But they are descended from machines, said Abetic, and their concept of an ultimate intelligence is quite different from Christianity's. A cold, dispassionate mind, a predictive power able to absorb all variables.
Father Glaucus was nodding. But they think, my son, their earliest self-conscious progenitors were designed from living DNA.
Designed from DNA to compute, I said, appalled at the thought of core machines being given the benefit of the doubt when it came to souls.
And what was our DNA designed to do for the first 100 million years, my son? Eat, kill, procreate? Were we any less ignoble in our beginnings than the pre-heterous silicon and DNA-based AIs? As Teilhard would have it, it is consciousness which God has created to accelerate the universe's self-awareness as a means to understanding His will.
The Technocore wanted to use humanity as part of its UI project, I said, and then to destroy us.
But it did not,
said Father Glaucus. No thanks to the core, I said.
Humanity has evolved as far as it has evolved, continued the old priest, with no thanks to its predecessors or itself. Evolution brings human beings. Human beings, through a long and painful process, bring humanity.
Empathy, Aeneas said softly. Father Glaucus turned his blind eyes in her direction.
Precisely, my dear. But we are not the only avatars of humanity. Once our computing machines achieved self-consciousness, they became part of this design. They may resist it. They may try to undo it for their own complex purposes. But the universe continues to weave its own design.
You make the universe and its processes sound like a machine, I said. Programmed, unstoppable, inevitable. The old man shook his head slowly.
No, never a machine, and never inevitable. If Christ's coming taught us anything, it is that nothing is inevitable. The outcome is always in doubt. Decisions for light or dark are always ours to make, ours and every conscious entity's.
But Tealhard thought that consciousness and empathy would win, said Aeneas. Father Glaucus waved a bony hand at the bookcase behind her.
There should be a book there, on the third shelf. It had a blue bookmark in it when last I looked, 30-some years ago. Do you see it?
The journals, notebooks, and correspondences of Tealhard de Chardin? Said Aeneas.
Yes, yes. Open it to where the blue bookmark is. Do you see the passage I have annotated? It is one of the last things these old eyes saw before the darkness closed.
The entry marked 12th December, 1919? Said Aeneas.
Yes, read it, please.
Aeneas held the book closer to the light of the fire. Note this well, she read. I attribute no definitive and absolute value to the various constructs of man. I believe that they will disappear, recast in a new whole that we cannot yet conceive. At the same time, I admit that they have an essential provisional role, that they are necessary, inevitable phases which we or the race, must pass through in the course of our metamorphosis. What I love in them is not their particular form, but their function, which is to build up, in some mysterious way, first something divinizable.
Oh, Lord, you don't run into that one too often.
First something divinizable, and then, through the grace of Christ alighting on our effort, something divine. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the soft hiss of the fuel pellet fire and the creak and groan of the tens of millions of tons of ice above and around us. Finally, Father Glaucus said,
That hope was Tealhard's heresy in the eyes of the current Pope. Belief in that hope was my great sin. This, he gestured to the outer wall where ice and darkness pressed against the glass, this is my punishment.
None of us spoke for another moment. Father Glaucus laughed and set bony hands on his knees.
But my mother taught me there is no punishment or pain where there are friends and food and conversation, and we have all of these. Embetic! I say embetic because your honorific does you no honor, sir. It sets you apart from humanity by falsely inventing false categories. Embetic! Sir, would you do this old man the favor of going into the kitchen to retrieve the coffee that should be ready? I will see to the stew and the bread that is heating. Endymion? Yes, father? Would you like to descend to the wine cellars to select the finest vintage available?
I smiled, knowing that the old priest could not see me. And how many floors must I descend before finding the cellar, father? Not 59, I hope. The old man's teeth showed through his beard.
I have wine with every meal, my son, so I would be in far better physical shape if that were the case. No, lazy old thing that I am, I keep the wine in the closet one flight below, near the stairwell.
I'll find it, I said. I'll set the table, said Aeneas, and tomorrow night I cook. We all scattered to our duties. The Raphael spins down into Sol Draconi Septum. Every other time, it's Sol Draconi Septum, the moon, or planet. But here, and the other two times I stumbled over it, it is Sol Draconi System. It doesn't help that it begins with an S and ends in TEM, and is the same number of letters. 45. The Raphael spins down into Sol Draconi System. Contrary to the explanations received by Father Captain de Soya and others who travel by Archangel craft, its drive mechanism is not a modification of the ancient Hawking drive that has defied the light speed barrier since before the Hegira. Raphael's drive is largely a hoax. When it reaches near quantum velocities, it keys a signal on a medium once referred to as the void which binds. Binds. An energy source from elsewhere triggers a distant device that ruptures a subplane of that medium, tearing through the fabric of space and time itself. That rupture is instantly fatal to the human crew, who die in agony. Cells rupturing, bones being ground to powder, synapses misfiring, bowels releasing, organs liquefying. They are never to know the details. All memory of the final microseconds of horror and death are erased during cruciform reconstruction and resurrection. Now Raphael begins its braking trajectory towards Sol Draconis Septum, its very real fusion drive slowing the ship under 200 gravities of strain. In their acceleration couches / resurrection creches, Father Captain de Soya, Sergeant Gregorius, and Corporal Key lie dead, their shredded bodies being pulverized a second time because the ship automatically conserves energy by not initializing internal fields until resurrection is well underway. Besides the 3 dead humans on board, there is one other pair of eyes. Radamth Nemes has opened the lid of her resurrection creche and now lies on the exposed couch, her compact body buffeted but not damaged by the terrible deceleration. As per standard programming, the life support in the general cabin is off. There is no oxygen, atmospheric pressure is too low to allow a human to survive without a spacesuit, and the temperature is minus 30 degrees centigrade. Nemes is indifferent. In her crimson jumpsuit, she lies on the couch and watches the monitors, occasionally querying the ship and receiving a reply on a fiber thread data link. 6 hours later, before the internal fields switch on and the bodies begin to be repaired in their complex sarcophagi, even while the cabin is still in virtual vacuum, Nemes stands, shoulders 200 gravities with no expression, and walks to the conference cubby and the plotting table. She calls up a map of Sol Draconis Septum and quickly finds the former route of River Tethys. Ordering the ship to overlay its long-range visuals, she runs her fingers across the hollowed image of ice rills, sastrugi dunes, and glacial crevasses. The top of one building rises from the atmospheric glacier. Nemes double-checks the plot. It is within 30 kilometers of the buried river. After 11 hours of braking, Raphael swings into orbit around the gleaming white snowball of Sol Draconis Septum. The internal fields have long since switched on. The life support systems are fully functional, but Radamth Nemes takes no more note of this than she had of the weight and vacuum. Before leaving the ship, she checks the resurrection creche monitors. She has more than 2 days before de Soya and his troopers will begin to stir in their creches. Settling into the dropship, Nemes runs a fiber-optic link from her wrist to the console, commands separation, and guides the ship across the Terminator into atmosphere without consulting instruments or controls. 18 minutes later, the dropship sets down on the surface within 200 meters of the stubby, ice-limbed tower. That is ice-Limn. ED, as in Limbed. I am not sure if limbed is pronounced limbed or limed. I'm pretty sure it's limbed. If somebody knows the answer, fantastic. If they don't, no worries, we're moving on. The sunlight is brilliant on the terraced glacier, but the sky is flat black. No stars are visible. Although the atmosphere here is negligible, the planet's massive thermal systems flowing from pole to pole drive incessant winds, accelerating ice crystals to 400 kilometers per hour. Ignoring the spacesuits and hazardous atmosphere suits hanging on the airlock, Radamth Nemes cycles the doors open. Not waiting for the ladder to deploy, she jumps the 3 meters to the surface, landing upright in the 1.7 G field. Ice needles strike her at flechette gun velocities. Nemes triggers an internal source that activates a biomorphic field within 0.8 millimeters of her body. To an outside observer, the compact woman with short black hair and flat black eyes suddenly becomes a reflective quicksilver sculpture in human form. The form jogs across the jagged ice at 30 clicks an hour, stops at the building, finds no entrance, and shatters a panel of plasteel with her fist. Stepping through the gash, she walks easily across glare ice to the top of the elevator shaft. Of an elevator shaft, even. She rips open the sagging doors. The elevators have long since dropped to the basement 80-some stories below. Radamth Nemes steps into the open shaft and drops into it, plummeting 108.8 feet per second into the darkness. Which I don't know the calculation for terminal velocity and how you adjust that for increased G load, but let's assume he actually mathed that out correctly. When she sees the light flashing past, she grabs a steel girder to stop herself. She has already reached her terminal velocity of more than 500 clicks per hour and decelerates to 0 in less than 0.03 of a second. This is generally not good for your body. But Nemes is very literally built different. Nemes strides from room to room, taking note of the furniture, the lanterns, the bookcases. The old man is in the kitchen. His head comes up when he hears the rapid footsteps.
"Raul," he says, "Ania?"
Exactly,
says Radamth Nemes, inserting 2 fingers under the old priest's collarbone and lifting him off the ground.
Where is the girl Ania? She asks softly. Where are all of them?
Amazingly, the blind priest does not cry out in pain. His worn teeth are clenched and his blind eyes stare at the ceiling, but he says only,
"I do not know."
Nemes nods and drops the priest to the floor. Straddling his chest, she sets her forefinger to his eye and fires a seeker microfilament into his brain, the seeker probe finding its way to a precise region of his cerebral cortex.
Now, Father, she says, let us try again. Where is the girl? Who is with her? Where are they?
The answers begin flowing through the microfilament as coded bursts of dying neural energy. Oh, we could stop there, but I can get one more chapter out. Why not?
On that dramatic note, our wonderful introduction to one Radamth Nemes.
We're going to have fun with her. Oh, she's going to have a few crowning moments, but she's going to have a crowning moment of awesome later. It's like right now it's like, oh, we're establishing her as a threat, and now we're going to establish her as something a bit more than that. It's pretty great. Fuck it, let's do one more chapter. 46. Our days with Father Glaucus were memorable for their comfort, their slowed pace after so many weeks of hurrying to and fro, and their conversations. Mostly, I think, I remember the conversations. It was shortly before the Chitchatuk returned that I learned one of the reasons for A. Betix having taken this voyage with me.
"Do you have siblings, Embetic?"
Father Glaucus asked, still refusing to use the android honorific. To my amazement, A. Betix said, yes. How could this be? Androids were designed and biofactured, assembled out of component genetic elements and grown in vats, like organs grown for transplants, I had always thought. During our biofacture, Abetic went on after the old priest prompted, androids were traditionally cloned in growth colonies of 5, usually 4 males and 1 female.
"Quintuplets,"
said Father Glaucus from his rocking chair.
"You have 3 brothers and a sister."
Yes, said the blue-skinned man. But surely you weren't... I began and stopped. I rubbed my chin. I had shaved there at Father Glaucus's strange home. It had seemed the civilized thing to do, and the feel of smooth skin almost startled me. But surely you didn't grow up together, I said. I mean, weren't androids biofactured as adults? Said Abetic with the same slight smile. No, our growth process was accelerated. We reached maturity at approximately 8 standard years, but there was a period of infancy and childhood. This delay was one of the reasons that android biofacture was almost prohibitively expensive.
What are your brothers' and sisters' names?
Asked Father Glaucus. Abetic closed the book he had been leafing through. The tradition was to name each member of the Quint group in alphabetic order. He said, "My siblings included A. Antib, A. Corazon, A. Daria, and A. Evic." "Which was your sister?" asked Ania. "Daria?" "Yes." "What was your childhood like?" said the girl. "Primarily one of being educated, trained for duties, and having service parameters defined," said Abetic. Ania was lying on the carpet, cupping her chin in her hands. "Did you go to school? Did you play?" "We were tutored at the factory, although the bulk of our knowledge came through RNA transfer." The bald man looked at Ania, "And if by play you mean to find time to relax with my siblings, the answer is yes." "What happened to your siblings?" asked Ania. Abetic slowly shook his head. "We were initially transferred to service together, but we were separated shortly thereafter. I was purchased by the Kingdom of Monaco in exile and shipped to Asquith. It was my understanding at the time that each of us would render service in different parts of the web or outback." And you never heard from any of them again?" I said. "No," said Abetic, "although there were a large number of android laborers imported for the construction of the Poet's City during the transfer of King William the 23rd's colony to that world. Most had been in service on Asquith before my time, and none had encountered one of my siblings during their transshipment periods." "During the web days," I said, "it should have been easy to search the other worlds by Farcaster and Datasphere." "Yes," said Abetic, "except for the fact that androids were forbidden by law and RNA inhibitors to travel by Farcasters or access the Datasphere directly. And, of course, it became illegal to biofacture or own androids within the hegemony shortly after my own creation." "So you were used in the Outback," I said, "on distant worlds like Hyperion." "Precisely, Endymion." I took a breath. "And is that why you wished to make this trip? To find one of your siblings? One of your brothers or your sister?" Abetic smiled. "The odds against running across one of my clone siblings would be truly astronomical, Endymion. Not only would the coincidence be unlikely, but the chance that any of them would have survived the wholesale destruction of androids following the fall would be very slight. But—" Abetic stopped and opened his hands, as if explaining foolishness. It was that last evening before the band returned that I heard Ania discuss her theory of love for the first time. It began with her questioning us about Martin Silenus's cantos. "All right," she said. "I understand that it was placed on the index of prohibited books as soon as the Pax took over anywhere, but what about those worlds not yet swallowed by the Pax when it came out? Did he receive the critical acclaim he had been hungry for?"
"I remember arguing the cantos in seminary," chuckled Father Glaucus. "We all knew it was prohibited, but that just made the allure all the greater. We resisted reading Virgil, but waited our turn to read that dog-eared copy of doggerel that was the cantos."
"Was it doggerel?" asked Ania. "I always thought of Uncle Martin as a great poet, but that's only because he told me he was. My mother always told me that he was a pain in the ass."
"Poets can be both," said Father Glaucus.
He chuckled again.
"In fact, it seems they often are both. As I remember it, most of the critics dismissed the cantos in what few literary circles existed before the Church absorbed them. Some took him seriously, as a poet, not as a chronicler of what actually happened on Hyperion just before the fall, but most made fun of his apotheosis of love toward the end of his second volume."
"I remember that," I said. "The character of Saul, the old scholar whose daughter has been aging backward, discovers that love was the answer to what he had called the Abraham dilemma."
I remember one nasty critic who reviewed the poem in our capital city, chuckled Father Glaucus, who quoted some graffiti found on a wall of an excavated old Earth city before the Hedgera. If love is the answer, what was the question?
Aeneas looked at me for an explanation. In the Cantos, I said, the scholar character seems to discover that the thing the AI core had called the void which binds is love. That love is a basic force of the universe, like gravity and electromagnetism, like strong and weak nuclear force. In the poem, Saul sees that the core ultimate intelligence will never be capable of understanding that empathy is inseparable from that source, from love. The old poet described love as the subquantum impossibility that carried information from photon to photon.
Teilhard would not have disagreed, said Father Glaucus, although he would have phrased it differently.
Anyway, I said, the almost universal reaction to the poem, according to Grandam, was that it was weakened by this sentimentality. Aeneas was shaking her head.
Uncle Martin was right, she said. Love is one of the basic forces of the universe. I know that Saul Weintraub really believed he had discovered that. He said as much to Mother before he and his daughter disappeared in the Sphinx, riding it to the child's future.
The blind priest quit rocking and leaned forward, his elbows propped on his bony knees. His padded cassock would have looked comical on a less dignified man.
Is this more complicated than saying that God is love? He said.
Yes, said Aeneas, standing in front of the fire now. She seemed older to me at that moment, as if she had grown and matured during our months together.
The Greeks saw gravity at work, but explained it as one of the four elements, earth, rushing back to its family. What Saul Weintraub glimpsed was a bit of the physics of love, where it resides, how it works, how one can understand and harness it. The difference between God is love and what Saul Weintraub saw, and what Uncle Martin tried to explain, is the difference between the Greek explanation of gravity and Isaac Newton's equations. One is a clever phrase, the other sees the thing itself.
Father Glaucus shook his head.
You make it sound quantifiable and mechanical, my dear.
No, said Aeneas, and her voice was about as strong as I had ever heard it.
No. Just as you explained how Teilhard knew that the universe evolving toward greater consciousness could never be purely mechanical, that the forces were not dispassionate, as science had always assumed, but derived from the absolute passion of divinity, well, so an understanding of love's part of the void which binds can never be mechanical. In a sense, it's the essence of humanity.
I stifled the urge to laugh. So you're saying that there needs to be another Isaac Newton to explain the physics of love? I said. To give us its laws of thermodynamics, its rules of entropy? To show us the calculus of love?
Yes,
said the girl, her dark eyes very bright. Father Glaucus was still leaning forward, his hands now gripping his knees very tightly.
Are you that person, young Aeneas from Hyperion?
Aeneas quickly turned away, walking almost out of the light toward the darkness and ice beyond the smart glass before turning and slowly stepping back into the circle of warmth. Her face was downcast. Her lashes were wet with tears. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost tremulous.
Yes, she said, I am afraid I am. I do not want to be, but I am, or could be, if I survive.
This sent chills down my back. I was sorry we had started this conversation.
Will you tell us now?
Said Father Glaucus. His voice held the simple entreaty of a child. Aeneas raised her face and then slowly shook her head.
I cannot. I am not ready. I'm sorry, Father.
The blind priest sat back in his chair and suddenly looked very old.
It is all right, my child. I have met you. That is something.
Aeneas went over to the old man in his rocking chair and hugged him for a long minute. Kuchiat and his band returned before we had awakened and got out of our beds and sleeping robes the next morning. During our days with the Chitchatuk, we had almost become accustomed to sleeping a few hours at a time, and then resuming the march in the eternal ice gloom. But here, with Father Glaucus, we followed his system, dimming the lights a bit in the innermost rooms for a full 8 hours of night. It was my observation that one was always weary in 1.7G environment. In a 1.7G environment. Understandable. The Chitchatuk disliked coming very far into the building, so they stood in the open windows, which was more ice tunnel than interior, and made a variation of their soft ululation until we hurriedly dressed and came running. The band was back up to the healthy prime of 23, although where they had found their new member, a woman, Father Glaucus did not ask, and the rest of us were never to learn. When I came into the room, the image struck me then that it has stayed with... When I came into the room, the image struck me then, and it has stayed with me ever since. The powerful, wraith-robed Chitchatuk, squatting in their most typical posture, Father Glaucus squatting and chatting with Kuchiat, the old priest's quilted and heavily patched cassock spreading out on the ice like a black flower, the glow of the fuel pellet lanterns prisming light from the crystals at the entrance to the ice cave, and, beyond the smart glass, that terrible sense of ice and weight and darkness pressing. We had long since asked Father Glaucus to be our interpreter in remaking, actually, our request of help to the Indigenes, and now the old man broached the subject, asking the white-robed figures if they would indeed like to help us get our raft downriver. The Chitchatuk responded in turn, each waiting to address Father Glaucus and the rest of us individually, and each saying essentially the same thing. They were ready to make the voyage. It was not to be a simple voyage. Kuchiat confirmed that there were tunnels descending all the way to the river at the second arch, almost 200 meters lower than where we now sat, and that there was a stretch of open water where the river passed beneath this second Farcaster, but there were no connecting tunnels between here and the second arch some 28 kilometers to the north.
"I've been meaning to ask," said Aeneas. "Where do these tunnels come from, anyway? They're too round and regular to be crevasses or fissures. Did the Chitchatuk make them at some time in the past?"
Father Glaucus looked at the child with an expression of bearded incredulity.
"You mean you don't know?"
he said. He turned his head and rattled syllables at the Chitchatuk. Their reaction was almost explosive, excited chatter, the near barking that we associated with laughter.
"I hope we didn't offend you, my dear. I hope I didn't offend you, my dear,"
said the old priest. He was smiling, his blind eyes turned in Aeneas' direction.
"It is just such a given of our existence here that it struck me, and the indivisible people, as strangely humorous that someone could move through the ice and not know."
"The indivisible people?" said Abetic.
"Chitchatuk," said Father Glaucus. "It means indivisible, or perhaps closer to the actual shading of the word, incapable of being made more perfect."
Aeneas was smiling.
"I'm not offended. I just like in on the joke. What did make the tunnels?"
"The wraiths," I guessed before the priest could speak. His smile turned in my direction.
"Precisely, my friend Raul, precisely."
Aeneas frowned.
"Their claws are formidable, but even the adults couldn't carve tunnels that extensive through such solid ice. Could they?"
I shook my head. "I don't think we've really seen the adult form."
"Precisely, precisely."
The old man was nodding deeply as he tended to do.
"Raul is correct, my dear. The Chitchatuk hunt the youngest cubs when possible. The older cubs hunt the Chitchatuk when possible. But the wraith cub form you see is the larval stage of the creature. It feeds and moves about on the surface during that stage, but within 3 of Sol Draconi Septim's orbits—"
"That would be 29 years standard," murmured Abetic.
"Precisely, precisely." nodded the priest. Within 3 local years, 29 standard, the immature wraith, the cub, although that word is usually used with mammals, passes through metamorphosis and becomes the true wraith, which bores through the ice at approximately 20 kilometers per hour. It is approximately 15 meters long and, well, you may well encounter one on your trip north.
I cleared my throat. I believe Kuchiat and Chiaku were explaining that there were no tunnels connecting this area to the Farcaster tunnels some 28 clicks north.
Ah, yes,
said Father Glaucus, and resumed his conversation in the clattering Chichetuk language. When Kuchiat had responded, the blind man said,
approximately 25 kilometers across the surface, which is more than the indivisible people like to do at one spell, and Aichakut kindly points out that this area is thick with wraiths, both cub and adult, that the invisible people who lived there for centuries have all been turned into skull necklaces for the wraiths. He points out that the summer storms are battering the surface this month, but for you, my friends, they are willing to make the voyage.
I shook my head. I don't understand. The surface is essentially airless, isn't it? I mean,
they have all the materials you will need for the trip, Raul, my son, said Father Glaucus.
Aichakut snarled something. Kuchiat added something in a more tempered tone.
They are ready to depart when you are, my friends. Kuchiat says that it will take 2 sleeps and 3 marches to return to your raft, and then they will head north until the burrows run out.
The old priest paused and turned his face away for a moment.
What is it?
asked Aeneas, concern in her voice. Father Glaucus turned back. His smile was forced. He ran bony fingers through his beard.
I will miss you. It has been a long time since... Ha! I am getting senile. Come, I will help you pack, have a fast breakfast, and see if we can round out your provisions with a few things from the storeroom.
The leave-taking was painful. The thought of the old man alone there in the ice once again, fending off wraiths and the planetary glacier with nothing more than a few lighted lamps, it made my chest hurt to think of it. Aeneas wept. When Aebetic went to shake the old priest's hand, Father Glaucus fiercely hugged the startled android.
Your day is yet to come, my friend Aebetic. I feel this. I feel this strongly.
Aebetic did not respond, but later, as we followed the Chichetuk into the deep glacier, I saw the blue man glancing back toward the tall silhouette against the light before we rounded another corner in the tunnel and lost sight of the building, the light, and the old priest. It did take us 3 marches and 2 sleeps before we slid and scraped our way down the final steep incline of ice, twisted right through a narrow break in the ice, and came out where the raft was tied up. I saw no way that the logs could be transported around the bends and turns of these endless tunnels, but this time the Chichetuk wasted not a minute admiring the ice-laden craft, but immediately went to work unlashing it and separating log from log. The entire band had marveled most visibly at our axe during the first visit, and now I was able to show them how it worked as I chopped each log into shorter segments, each segment only 1.5 meters in length. Using my fading flashlight laser, Aebetic and Aeneas were doing the same thing on our impromptu assembly line. Aebetic and Aeneas were doing the same thing on our impromptu assembly line, the Chichetuk scraping ice off the almost sinking craft, cutting or untying knots, and handing the long segments up to where we cut and stacked. When we were done, the stone hearth, extra lanterns, and ice were on the ice shelf, and the wood was piled up the long tunnel like next year's firewood. The thought amused me at first, but then I realized how welcome a store of combustible material such as this might have been to the Chichetuk. Heat, light to drive the wraiths away. I looked at our dismantled raft in a different way. Well, if we failed to get through the second portal... Using Aeneas as our translator now, we communicated to Kuchiat that we would like to leave the axe, the hearth, and the other odds and ends with them. It is fair to say that the faces behind the wraith teeth visors looked stunned. The Chitchatuk milled around, hugging and patting us on the back with enough strength to knock the wind out of each of us. Even angry Aichakut patted and shoved us with something like rough affection. Each member of the band lashed 3 or 4 of the log segments to his or her back. Abetic, Ania, and I did the same. They were as heavy as concrete in this G-field. And we began the long trek uphill toward the surface, vacuum, storm, and wraiths. And that is where we will leave it for today. We are still on, not tentatively, for Wednesday, Thursday. That is the plan. It's what we're going to do. Let me hit the magic button here. The other magic button. I have several magic buttons. Hot keys. So yeah, at some point in the probably distant future, I would really like to read the Uplift series by David Brin on stream. It is too good not to. It's very good. I put it as a series up there with the best of the best. It is as some would say a triumph. Ordinarily, I wouldn't. I ever see that in those little zinger one-liners they have, as to hype a book up. Whenever I see a triumph, like, my brain turns off. I'm like, oh, well, okay. Nobody had anything intelligent to say about this, so. But that series as a whole is a triumph. I have special attachment to some of the books over others. So yeah, actually this week we should finish the first Endymion book of the duology, which is pretty good. Yeah, we should be able to do that. They'll both be a bit shorter than we've been doing. Let me get a bookmark in there. Good. 3 bookmarks to delineate progress. Let's see. What else? Excuse me. Gosh. Again, I have this lung thing going on. Some sort of a chest cold that's been kind of brewing in my bits for a little while now, about a week now. And it's really coming to a head. Not too bad, but scratchy throat, the usual. I did take a COVID test, as I mentioned earlier. It is not COVID, apparently. Admittedly, my test is past its expiry date, but most of those are still quite adequate at detecting the antigen. So, I'm not too worried on that score. Could be a flu, although I don't have most of the other symptoms. I did get vaccinated for the flu not so long ago, but that's a crapshoot and a half anyway. Right, I wanted to check to see if there was anything new from the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Watts. Because he's got a new book in the Sunflower series that he's releasing. That is the same series that, what's it called? The Freeze Frame Revolution is from. Not seeing anything there. He doesn't have a new blog post since sometime in December, and he went a couple months. He has something about the series Pluribus, Plur-1bus, which I have not seen yet. I'll get around to it maybe someday. No, nothing new or fancy there. So yes, as far as, my basic game plan for the relatively immediate future for the next couple months
is to get through the Endymion, Rise of Endymion, and also the short story collection that has a short story that ties in to post-finale of the Endymion series. I don't know if we call it the Endymion Cantos. I haven't seen it put together like that, but it is, that's the wrong wiki. Pedia, please, and thank you. Okay, sorry I've been muted for the last however long. Things one forgets is that I have my mic mute set to an actual letter key on the keyboard, because normally I'm not typing when I'm streaming. So yeah. I guess we call it the Endymion Canto, or it's part of the Hyperion Cantos. We just call it the Hyperion Cantos, but I'll just say the Endymion duology. Follow-up to the Hyperion Cantos, or latter half of the Hyperion, whatever. Anyway, so the basic game plan then, since it's taken us about a month and change to get through the first book of Hyperion, book of Endymion, sorry. The second book is slightly longer. The Rise of Endymion is slightly longer, so expect a little bit longer than that. I would like to get around to reading Ring Shout on stream, but if I'm not done by the end of February, so be it. But I'd probably use that as like an interregnum between doing that and the short story collection Worlds Enough and Time by Dan Simmons, that has a short story that is a sort of a semi-distant sequel to the finale of The Rise of Endymion. And then after that, we'd probably just get cracking on VIII, because, yes, I want to read VIII by C.J. Cherryh so badly. It's been what I've been wanting to do on stream practically since the beginning. And now I feel I've done adequate prep work for it. There's a few more Alliance Union books I could do that take place before it, but they aren't directly relevant. Tripoint, for instance, Rim Runners, for instance. There's one or two. There's a couple others that take place a little bit before it in the timeline, but it's not the timeline in the actual chronological order of events in the Alliance Union universe, or Merchantry Union? Yeah, Alliance Union universe by C.J. Cherryh, and the actual written order of books in that are not the same thing. And they are all meant to be taken largely as their own thing anyway. With the two exceptions of Heavy Time and Hellburner, which are, directly connected to each other, and VIII and Regenesis, which are also directly connected to each other. You need to read, in fact, VIII to Regenesis is even more crucial than heavy time into Hellburner. Because with Hellburner, I feel you could kind of get away without necessarily knowing the characters. You'd want to. That carry over. It would help. Because otherwise it's like, oh, this so-and-so knows this person, whoop-de-doo. But that helps. But with Regenesis, it's like, you'd be pretty lost if you hadn't read VIII. It's unlike, say, the Lazarus Effect, or really any of the Pandora sequence novels by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom, which you can basically read on their own and not suffer at all. They all have their own defined thematics, mostly their own defined characters. You do have overlap, but the way things are structured means you can read them individually. I know the first one of those that I had ever read was the Lazarus Effect. In fact, I think I read that before I even read Destination Void. And then I read Destination Void at some point when I was collecting Frank Herbert books. And then, well later, quite a while later, I wound up getting the Jesus Incident and the Ascension Factor. So, it was okay to read out of order. I did not feel like I lost anything by doing that. I also really need to get on with reading more of the Legend of the Condor Heroes. What is that called? Something of the Condor Heroes. Because I did the first book of that. I want to do the rest of that series. That series is fun. It's just good wuxia fun. So much fun. Thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable. Just kung fu movie stuff. It's great. As I said before, I'd like to get around to reading Alien Clay on stream. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's read that. Sorry, I did not see you had tuned in, Milos Bolt. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I also want to read US! by Chris Batchelder, which is kind of sort of about the man, the myth, the legend, Upton Sinclair, but it's really more about America's, when I say America, I mean the United States' relationship with socialism and communism. Which I realize probably makes some people pause a little and cock an eyebrow. It is very good. It is satire, I would say, but it's satire in the Kurt Vonnegut sense. So it's pretty dark, actually. Mostly because America's relationship with the United States' relationship with communism is very dark. Other ones I want to get to. I do want to get around to reading Red Noise on stream, because it's fun. There's plenty more CJ Cherry we can read through after we get through VIII and Regenesis. I don't know how long VIII is going to take to get through. That's going to be a while. That's going to be probably like a 2-month project, at a guess. Even with doing one book at a time, that's going to take a while. It's a hefty tome. It's not quite as long as Endymion, the Endymion duology, but it is hefty. Yeah, plenty of cool stuff. I also want to read some culture novels by Ian M. Banks on stream. This year, I'd like to get at least 1 or 2 of those in. I will probably read through them chronologically in publication order, or writing order. I think that works out pretty well because of the way he winds up adding new ideas and themes. A couple books from the quote end unquote of the series, that is to say, a couple books before the author dies, you start noticing certain particular themes that start popping up and being, he's sort of mulling about in his head and coming to terms with, namely that of mortality. So yeah, some good fun stuff. I also want to get a Brunner novel in. I got to get some John Brunner in. Probably either The Sheep Look Up or Stand on Zanzibar. Although the Shockwave Runner is also pretty good. That one's fairly iconic for a number of reasons. I think I'm pretty sure that's the one that introduces the concept of a worm in terms of a computer virus. Because that's kind of it's an important part of the whole thing. I'd also say that's probably one of the most influential books on... certainly he's one of the most influential authors on Peter Watts specifically, which I didn't really realize until I read some of their stuff back to back. And he actually said it, Peter Watts. He's like, oh yeah, John Brunner, big fan. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's really apparent when you're reading through either the Shockwave Runner or like Stand on Zanzibar or The Sheep Look Up, and reading what's it called, the Starfish trilogy, Rifters trilogy. Reading those like near each other is like, oh yeah. There's a lot of stylistic overlap here. Some aping, if you will, significantly different enough so that Peter Watts stands very well on his own. But I think it is important to know that John Brunner. John Brunner's worth reading anyway. I'll also probably try and get around to reading Vampires with a $, the book that influenced the movie by John Carpenter, as the movie is. And also, like, the only other thing that John Stakely, the author of Armor, ever wrote. I think it's relevant. It's also not a bad book. Say what you will about some of the characters in the book. There's one or two Armor references. You'll know them when you see them. It's an interesting affair. I think, honestly, it could have been turned into a series very easily. You could have turned that into a long-running series if you wanted. Same with Armor, really. Armor's universe and setting is so rich that you could have done anything with that. It's just a crime that he never wrote more. A talented author. Yep, that's enough yapping out of me. I got other things to do. I'm sure everybody else does too. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. I'm sorry this is not on the purported Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule that it is ordinarily supposed to be. Today was kind of a return to form, and this Wednesday will be kind of a return to form, but that will not remain true. Going forward, my schedule is going to be catch as catch can for the indefinite and possible forever future. So I'll just get in whatever reading days I can throughout the week, and people just have to tune in. Or just listen to them after the fact and not worry about any of that. Which is easier, by far. So go ahead and do that. I'm not going to tell you to do anything to juke the algorithm unless it makes your life easier. Yeah, I think that's it for me. I can't think of anything else to say, even pointless irrelevancies. So, gonna call it for today. See you all in whatever date it was. I don't know. Wednesday, the 21st, is the plan of January. In 2026 current common era. Alright. That's it from me. Stay safe. Stay sane. Be decent to each other. Don't get chest colds. Until next time.